The rain had been falling since morning, soft at first, then heavier, until it soaked the streets of New York and left the air smelling of asphalt and damp earth. Emily Smith pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders as she climbed the narrow steps to her apartment building. Her legs ached from 12 hours on her feet at Mount Sinai Hospital, and her hands trembled faintly from fatigue as she fished for her keys. The hallway smelled of fried onions from a neighbor's dinner, the familiar scent of modest living pressing in on her as she opened the door to the two-bedroom apartment she shared with her parents and younger sister. Mary Smith was in the kitchen, drying dishes with the faded flowered apron she had worn for years. She looked up when Emily entered, her lined face brightening, though worry always hovered beneath her smile. On the sofa in the living room, John Smith was stretched out under a wool blanket, his once strong body weakened by the illness that had consumed their savings. His chest rose and fell in uneven rhythms, the toll of chemotherapy etched in the grayness of his skin. "Long day, honey?" Mary asked gently, putting down the towel. Emily nodded, dropping her bag by the door. "2 codes, 1 lost patient. I'm just glad to be home." She hadn't even taken off her shoes when the doorbell rang, sharp and unexpected against the rain's steady rhythm. Mary frowned. Who could that be at this hour? Emily opened the door to find a uniformed courier standing there, his cap beaded with raindrops. In his gloved hand he held an envelope unlike any Emily had ever received. Cream-colored paper thick as cardstock, sealed with a golden crest pressed into crimson wax. "For Miss Emily Smith," he said, his voice brisk but polite. Emily hesitated before taking it, her heart fluttering strangely at the sight of something so out of place in their small world. She turned it over in her hand, tracing the raised edges of the crest before stepping back inside. "Who's it from?" Mary asked, drying her hands on her apron as she joined Emily by the door. "I don't know." Emily broke the seal carefully, almost reluctant to disturb the perfect circle of wax. Inside was a letter written on elegant stationery, the ink a deep navy, the handwriting precise. She read aloud, her voice shaking slightly. "Miss Smith, it would be an honor if you would join me for dinner at the Vista Grill this Thursday at 8 p.m. Respectfully, Daniel Scott." The name landed like a weight in the room. Mary adjusted her glasses and frowned. "Daniel Scott? That can't be the Daniel Scott, can it? The son of old Henry Scott? The man who owns those vast ranches down in Texas?" Emily's eyes widened. She had seen the name in the society pages, usually attached to headlines about multi-million-dollar land deals or photographs at charity galas. The heir to a fortune worth $500 million. "But why me?" she whispered. Her father stirred on the couch, opening tired eyes that still carried their familiar warmth. "What's all this?" His voice was raspy from treatments. Emily crossed the room and handed him the letter. He read it slowly, his brow furrowing. "Daniel Scott. I don't understand. Why would a man like that want dinner with my daughter?" Mary shook her head, worry tightening her features. "It doesn't make sense. People like him don't send letters like this to people like us." Before Emily could answer, the doorbell rang again. This time, it was the same courier holding a bouquet of pristine white orchids wrapped in silk paper. A small card tucked inside carried only 3 initials, DS. Mary gasped. "Orchids. Lord above, Emily, what is this about?" Emily stood frozen, the flowers cool in her arms, her pulse quickening with every beat. She thought of her father's mounting medical bills, over $50,000 they had no way of paying. She thought of the hours she worked, the life she barely lived outside the hospital walls. And now this, a letter sealed in wax. Orchids from a stranger whose name alone carried the weight of power and money. Her younger sister Sarah, just 19, peeked out from their shared room, her eyes widening. "Emily, do you know him?" "No," Emily said, her voice unsteady. "I've never met him." The letter trembled in her hand, and she could not stop staring at the name written in perfect script. Daniel Scott. The world he represented was not just far away. It was unreachable, a place she had never even allowed herself to imagine belonging to. Yet somehow, impossibly, That world had reached for her. And as the rain tapped against the windows and the orchids filled the small apartment with their fragile fragrance, a question whispered in the silence between them. Why her? Why now? The Vista Grill rose above the city like a glass crown, its windows glowing with golden light against the stormy night sky. Emily stepped out of the taxi, her heart pounding so fast she felt it in her throat. The rain had slowed to a mist, and the doorman hurried to shield her with a black umbrella as she approached the revolving doors. She clutched her small purse like a lifeline, the navy dress she had ironed 3 times that evening clinging nervously to her frame. Inside, the air was warm and fragrant with the smell of roasted meats and expensive wine. Chandeliers spilled light over polished wood and hushed conversations. She had never set foot in a place like this, and for a moment she thought the maitre d' would laugh at her when she gave her name. Instead, he smiled politely and gestured for her to follow. Every step felt heavier as they wound through tables covered in crisp white cloths, where men in tailored suits and women in sparkling gowns sipped champagne. Emily tried not to notice how out of place she felt, how her shoes pinched from too much walking at the hospital. But when the maitre d' stopped at the farthest corner of the restaurant, by a wall of windows that revealed the skyline glittering in the rain, she forgot her discomfort. Daniel Scott rose from his chair to greet her. He was taller than she expected, broad-shouldered, with a face carved in sharp lines that should have been cold, but wasn't. His black hair caught the golden light, and silver threads at his temples only made him seem more distinguished. His eyes, amber, almost honey-colored, met hers with such intensity that heat rushed to her cheeks. "Miss Smith," he said, his voice deep and smooth. He extended his hand. Emily placed hers in his, expecting it to feel soft from a life of privilege, but his skin was warm, firm, even a little rough. The touch lasted only seconds, yet it sent a strange shiver up her arm. She pulled back too quickly, her nerves betraying her. "Thank you for coming," he said. She sat opposite him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The waiter poured wine into her glass, red and rich, the kind that probably cost more than her entire grocery bill for the month. "I imagine you're wondering why you're here," Daniel said, his eyes never leaving her face. "I am," she admitted, her voice steady, though her pulse was not. He leaned slightly closer, lowering his tone so only she could hear. "I need to get married." The words struck her like a blow. For a moment she thought she had misheard, that the hum of the restaurant had distorted his meaning, but his gaze was steady, serious. "Excuse me?" "A marriage of convenience," he clarified. His fingers brushed the rim of his glass in deliberate circles. "My grandfather's will requires that I be married before I turn 40 to retain control of the company. I am 38. The time is slipping away." Emily's heart thudded painfully. "Why me?" Daniel leaned back, studying her. "Because you are not like the others. I know your situation, Miss Smith. You work tirelessly to support your family. Your father is ill, the bills are suffocating, and yet you endure. You are not a woman who would exploit me for wealth or power. I need someone honest, someone real." His words cut through her defenses, leaving her both shaken and strangely seen. "You investigated me?" she said softly, shame and anger mixing. "I had to be sure. This arrangement cannot be built on lies." Her throat went dry as his conditions spilled out. 2 years of marriage, shared appearances, separate rooms, $1 million in 3 installments, the first payment immediately after the wedding, enough to pay for her father's treatments, her sister's education, to give her family a life free of debt. The temptation coiled inside her like fire and poison at once. "And what if feelings arise?" she asked before she could stop herself. For the first time, Daniel faltered. A flicker of something, pain, regret, passed through his golden eyes. He set down his glass with a firmness that made the table shiver. "That cannot happen. Not for either of us." The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of half-touched food and silence weighted with unspoken questions. When it was time to leave, Daniel escorted her downstairs. The night air smelled of rain and his cologne, earthy and masculine. As his chauffeur pulled up the car, Emily tried to protest when Daniel reached for his wallet to tip the driver. Their fingers brushed. The spark that shot up her arm made her catch her breath. He noticed, his expression unreadable as he whispered, "Take all the time you need to decide." On the ride home, Emily pressed her hand to the place where his touch still lingered. She closed her eyes and saw again the intensity of his gaze, the certainty of his voice, the danger in his promise. $1 million could save her family, but what would it cost her heart? Emily barely slept that night. The shadows of the city stretched across her bedroom walls, but her mind refused to rest. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Daniel Scott's golden stare, heard the weight of his words echoing in her chest. Marriage, contract, $1 million. She turned over on her thin mattress, clutching the pillow as though it could anchor her to something real. By morning, her body felt heavier than her soul. She found her father in the living room, sitting upright for once, his oxygen machine purring softly beside him. The early light made his face look hollow, yet his smile was gentle when he saw her. Emily sank into the armchair across from him, her heart hammering. "You're pale," John said, studying her. "Something's wrong. Tell me." She hesitated. To speak the words out loud would make them real, would drag last night out of the realm of dreams and into the fragile space of their lives. But her father's eyes, tired yet filled with love, left her no choice. "He asked me to marry him," she whispered. John frowned in confusion. "Who? Daniel Scott?" Her father blinked slowly, as though the name itself carried too much weight. "The ranching tycoon. Heir to $500 million. Why would a man like that ask you?" Emily twisted her hands together. "Not for love, for convenience. His grandfather's will demands he marry before 40. He is 38. He offered me a contract, 2 years, appearances, $1 million. Her voice trembled. "Enough to pay every bill. Enough to secure your treatments. Enough to change everything." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the hiss of oxygen. Her father's eyes clouded with sorrow. "And what of your heart, Emily? What will this man give you besides money?" She wanted to say nothing. She wanted to pretend it was simple, but images returned. Daniel's rough hand warm against hers, the flicker of pain in his gaze when he said feelings must not be involved. Something human beat beneath that armor of wealth, something dangerous and irresistible. "I don't know," she admitted. Her father reached for her hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "I spent my life fixing cars, not fortunes. But I learned something turning those wrenches. Everything comes with a hidden cost. You can't take what looks shiny without asking what rust lies underneath. Are you prepared to pay the price of being Mrs. Scott?" Her throat tightened. "What choice do we have? The bills are piling higher. Mom is breaking down. Sarah deserves a future. And your life depends on treatment we can't afford." Pain flickered in his eyes, not for himself, but for her. "If I must be the reason you sacrifice your happiness, then I would rather die tomorrow." Tears filled her eyes. "Don't say that." "Then promise me something," John said softly. "If you do this, if you walk into his world, don't lose yourself in the bargain. Hold on to who you are, Emily. Money saves lives, but love, real love, saves souls." Before she could answer, Sarah entered with her school books, her bright face momentarily chasing away the heaviness. "Emily, you're home early." She dropped her bag, grinning. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Emily forced a smile, but her father's words echoed in her heart. She had not seen a ghost. She had seen a man with eyes like fire, offering salvation and chains in the same breath. And even as she promised herself she would not say yes, she knew deep inside that the decision was already tightening around her like invisible ropes. The day of the wedding arrived without music, without flowers, without laughter. Emily sat in the back of a black car, staring at her reflection in the tinted window. Her dress was not white silk, but a simple cream suit Daniel's assistant had chosen for her. No veil, no bouquet, no procession down an aisle lined with family and friends. Only silence and the faint hum of the city outside. The courthouse loomed ahead, its gray stone walls unforgiving under the morning sun. When she stepped out, a small breeze tugged at her hair. Daniel was already waiting at the steps, immaculately dressed in a charcoal suit, his expression unreadable. He extended his hand, and though Emily placed hers in his, the gesture felt more like signing a contract than stepping into a marriage. Inside, the chamber was plain and cold. A clerk shuffled papers, the officiant cleared his throat, and Daniel's lawyer hovered nearby with a briefcase that seemed heavier than the room itself. Emily's mother sat stiffly in the back row, her hands knotted together. Sarah, pale and wide-eyed, clutched her notebook to her chest as though she were watching a play she could not understand. John had insisted on staying home, too weak to attend, though his absence pressed against Emily like a hollow weight. The vows were recited not with trembling joy, but with business-like precision. The officiant asked if she would take Daniel Scott as her lawful husband. Emily's mouth was dry as she forced the words, "I do." Daniel's voice followed, steady as stone. When the time came to exchange rings, he slipped a heavy band of gold onto her finger. It was beautiful, but it felt like a shackle. Then came the kiss. It was supposed to be brief, a gesture for the law, nothing more. Yet when Daniel leaned closer, the world seemed to still. His lips touched hers softly, just long enough to suggest something unspoken, something neither of them had agreed to. For 3 seconds, the contract was forgotten. For 3 seconds, her body betrayed her. Heat greasy, breath-catching. And then it was over, replaced by applause that sounded hollow in the echoing chamber. The papers were signed. The lawyer tucked the documents away. Just like that, Emily was no longer Emily Smith, but Emily Scott, wife of a man she barely knew. Outside, photographers had gathered despite Daniel's attempts at privacy. Their questions cut through the air. Who was she? Where had she come from? Was this love or strategy? Flashbulbs blinded her as Daniel wrapped an arm around her waist. His touch was firm, protective, and for a fleeting moment she leaned into it before reminding herself this was performance, nothing more. As the car doors shut and the city noise faded, Daniel finally spoke, his voice low. From this day forward, appearances matter. Whatever we feel or don't feel, the world must believe this is real. Emily stared down at her ring, the metal catching the light like a warning. She had thought the ceremony would be the end of her doubts, the final step into sacrifice for her family. But that unexpected softness in his kiss lingered like a whisper she could not ignore. And as the car pulled away, she realized with sudden dread that this was not the end. It was only the beginning of a story far more dangerous than she had imagined. The flight to the Florida Keys was silent, except for the low hum of engines and the sound of pages turning in Daniel's folder of business reports. Emily sat by the window, staring at the ocean below, wondering how she had been transported from her small apartment in New York to this strange new world of polished leather seats and private jets. Her wedding ring glinted under the cabin lights, heavy with meaning she did not fully understand. When they landed, the air was thick with salt and sun. The resort waiting for them seemed pulled from a dream, its white villas perched on turquoise waters, palm trees swaying lazily in the breeze. Staff welcomed them with champagne and polite smiles, assuming they were a couple, in love. The lie pressed against Emily's chest until she could hardly breathe. Their villa overlooked the sea. A hammock swayed between 2 palms, a private pool shimmered like liquid glass, and beyond the terrace the horizon stretched endlessly. Emily touched the polished railing, trying to steady herself. She had never seen such beauty, but it felt borrowed, fragile, as though it could vanish at any moment. That night, they attended a dinner on the beach arranged by the resort. Candles glowed in the sand, and a string quartet played softly as waves lapped the shore. Emily wore a dress loaned by Daniel's assistant, a flowing silk that made her feel like an imposter. She could feel eyes on them, guests watching the powerful air with his new bride. Daniel leaned close, his voice low enough only she could hear. "Smile," he murmured. "They're all watching." Emily forced a smile, though her heart raced. She lifted her glass and caught the flicker of his eyes. In them she saw something she hadn't expected. a shadow of loneliness so deep it startled her. For a moment she forgot the contract, forgot the money, forgot everything but the man sitting across from her, a man who had once loved and lost so deeply that he now lived behind walls of steel. Later, back in the villa, the illusion of romance grew heavier. Emily tried to retreat to the guest room, but Daniel stopped her at the doorway. His hand brushed her arm, light as a whisper, but it sent a spark rushing through her veins. "You don't have to be afraid," he said softly. His golden eyes held hers, steady but vulnerable. "I promised this would be on your terms. Tonight we share nothing more than trust. I promise to be gentle." Her breath caught. She should have walked away, should have reminded him of the rules they had agreed upon. Yet something inside her shifted at those words. For the first time since the letter with the golden seal arrived, she felt her fear loosen. His voice carried no command, only quiet assurance. They sat together on the terrace hammock, the stars scattering silver across the black sky. He spoke of Isabella, his late wife, and the unborn child he lost. His voice broke, and without thinking, Emily reached for his hand. When his fingers closed around hers, it felt like the first moment of truth between them. Hours passed in conversation until exhaustion finally drew her against his shoulder. The night air wrapped them in its warmth, the sea whispering at their feet. Emily drifted to sleep with his promise echoing in her ears. And though nothing had happened, something had changed. Something dangerous, something tender, something neither of them could deny anymore. The days in the Keys unfolded like a dream neither of them had planned. Morning walks along the shoreline turned into playful splashes in the surf, laughter breaking through the walls they had built. Meals once eaten in silence were now filled with teasing remarks and stolen glances. Emily found herself watching Daniel when he wasn't looking, memorizing the way his jaw tensed when he was deep in thought, the rare curve of his lips when he smiled. She reminded herself again and again this was temporary, a contract, an illusion, but her heart refused to obey. One night, a storm rolled in from the horizon, sweeping across the sea with thunder and flashes of lightning. The resort lost power briefly, plunging the villa into darkness. Emily froze, startled by the crash of thunder, and Daniel's hand found hers in the dark. His grip was firm, protective, as if the storm itself might steal her away. When the lights flickered back, their faces were close, breaths mingling. He leaned toward her, and this time she didn't pull back. Their kiss was no longer a performance or an accident. It was hungry, trembling, filled with every unspoken word they had been too afraid to share. But just as the walls crumbled between them, a shadow from Daniel's past reappeared. The following evening they were invited to a charity gala at the resort, one Daniel could not refuse without sparking questions. Emily wore a simple gown in deep blue, her nerves on edge as they stepped into the glittering hall. Crystal chandeliers bathed the room in gold, and every eye seemed to follow them. Daniel's hand at the small of her back steadied her, his touch both protective and possessive. Then she saw her. Vivian Caldwell, tall, flawless, draped in a gown of crimson that commanded attention. She glided across the marble floor like she owned it, her eyes locking onto Daniel with practiced familiarity. "Daniel," Vivian purred as she reached them, her smile sharp as glass. "It has been far too long." Her gaze slid to Emily, cold and assessing. "And this must be the new bride. How unexpected." Emily felt the weight of every whisper in the room pressing down on her. The way Vivian spoke made it sound like Emily was nothing more than a passing amusement, a temporary distraction for a man like Daniel. Daniel's jaw tightened, but his arm around Emily did not waver. "Vivian, this is Emily, my wife." The word carried a quiet finality, but Emily caught the flicker in Vivian's eyes, a glimmer of amusement that hinted at secrets not yet revealed. Vivian leaned closer, lowering her voice so only Emily could hear. "Enjoy your role while it lasts. Daniel has always been generous with his affections, but he belongs to a world you cannot possibly understand." The words sliced through Emily like knives. For the rest of the evening she felt as though she were standing on a cliff's edge, her newfound closeness to Daniel suddenly fragile under the weight of Vivian's presence. When they returned to the villa, Daniel was silent, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but filled with steel. "She will too. Try to destroy this. She knows how to exploit weakness. Do not let her see yours." Emily met his gaze, her chest tightening. "And what if my greatest weakness is you?" The storm that had passed the night before now raged inside both of them, unspoken desires tangled with the threat of betrayal. Vivian's return had cracked open a door Emily wasn't sure she wanted to look through. For the first time, she wondered if love was not the greatest danger of all. The return to Texas felt like stepping into another world. The Scott Ranch stretched endlessly under a burning sun, fields of green rolling toward the horizon, herds of cattle moving like dark waves in the distance. The house itself rose from the land like a fortress, all stone walls and towering windows, a place built not only for comfort, but for power. Emily stood at the edge of the driveway as the car pulled away, her suitcase at her feet, and felt the weight of generations pressing down on her shoulders. This was not just a home, it was a legacy, and now it was hers too. Inside, the staff greeted her politely but with curious eyes. She could feel their unspoken questions, the doubt simmering beneath their practiced smiles. Was she worthy of this place? Was she here for love or for money? Daniel walked beside her, calm and commanding, his presence filling the halls. He introduced her as Mrs. Scott, his wife, and though the words were firm, she could sense the whispers trailing after them like shadows. That first night, dinner was held in the grand dining room, a table so long it could seat 30, though only 5 were present. Daniel's parents, Henry and Margaret Scott, sat at the far end, their faces carved in stone. Henry's eyes were sharp, assessing Emily with every movement she made. Margaret's smile was delicate but distant, her voice warm enough to disguise the frost beneath. They spoke of cattle sales, of board meetings, of heirs. Always of heirs. "When should we expect news of a child?" Henry asked bluntly, his fork striking the plate with finality. Emily froze, the question cutting through her like a blade. Daniel's gaze flicked to her, then back to his father. "That is between my wife and me," he said firmly. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. Emily lowered her eyes, but inside her chest something stirred. Anger, fear, defiance. This marriage might have begun as a contract, but she would not allow herself to be treated like broodstock. Later, when the house was quiet, Daniel found her in the library staring at the rows of leather-bound books she would never have dreamed of touching before. His voice was softer now. "You don't have to answer to them. Not about children, not about anything." "But I do," she whispered. "This family, this house, this world. It demands things I am not sure I can give." Daniel stepped closer, his hand brushing hers in the shadows of the lamplight. "What I demand is only truth. That you are here, with me. That is enough." For a moment, their eyes locked, and the intensity of it nearly unraveled her. She wanted to believe him, but the pressure of his family was already burrowing under her skin. The next morning, the ranch erupted in chaos. A sickness had spread among the cattle, and panic rippled through the workers. Daniel rode out with the ranch hands, commanding them with calm authority, but Emily could not stay behind. Her training as a nurse propelled her into the stables where she examined the animals with careful eyes. She noticed the water troughs smelled faintly bitter, a chemical tang that did not belong. "Someone poisoned this," she told Daniel when he returned, her voice low but steady. His jaw tightened. Who would dare? That night, while the household slept, Daniel stood on the veranda staring into the dark fields. Emily joined him, the air heavy with heat and secrets. He turned to her, his expression carved with steel. "This was no accident. Someone is trying to strike at me through the ranch, through us." She felt a chill despite the warm night. The ranch was no longer just a home. It was a battlefield, and she had stepped into the center of a war she did not yet understand. The air around the ranch grew heavier after the poisoning. Every worker walked with unease, every whisper carried suspicion. Emily felt the tension the moment she stepped outside, yet she refused to stay in the background. She spent long hours in the stables alongside the ranch hands, her sleeves rolled up, her hands steady as she inspected troughs, cleaned wounds, and helped administer treatments. At first, the men looked at her with doubt, a city nurse pretending to belong in their world. But when she saved a calf that had collapsed from dehydration, something shifted. Respect flickered in their eyes, Daniel noticed. That evening, when she walked into the great hall covered in dust and smelling of hay, he stared at her as though seeing her for the first time. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. "Yes, I did," she answered, her chin lifting. "If I am to stand beside you, I cannot just wear your ring. I must fight your battles too." His gaze darkened, not with anger but with something more dangerous, desire. He turned away before it consumed him, yet Emily felt the heat of it linger long after. But as her bond with the workers grew stronger, Vivian Caldwell returned like a storm cloud. Her arrival was unannounced, her crimson car slicing across the gravel driveway as if she owned the land. She swept into the ranch house during a board meeting, her laughter echoing through the hall. "Daniel," she drawled, her eyes sliding to Emily with poisonous sweetness. "I came because I heard troubling things. Investors whisper that your marriage is nothing but a contract, that the sweet nurse from New York is playing a role in your little drama." Emily stiffened, every muscle burning with rage. The board members exchanged uneasy glances, and for the first time, Daniel's power seemed fragile. Later that night, Emily found him in the library, his hands clenched on the edge of the desk. "She will destroy you," Emily said, her voice trembling but firm. Daniel looked up, golden eyes blazing. "She is already trying. The rumors are spreading. They will question my leadership, our marriage, everything I have built." "Then let them see the truth," Emily whispered, stepping closer. "Let them see that we are not just a bargain." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Are we not?" The words cut through her like glass. For a moment she saw the broken man behind the armor, the widower who had buried love and never expected to find it again. She wanted to shout that it was real for her now, that every touch, every kiss, every stolen moment had become her truth. But fear held her tongue. Instead, fate forced her hand. 2 days later, during a community gathering hosted at the ranch, a group of angry investors confronted them publicly. They demanded proof that Emily was more than a paid bride. Voices rose, accusations flying, and Vivian's satisfied smile pierced through the crowd. Emily stood frozen, the humiliation suffocating her. Then she remembered her father's words. "Money saves lives, but love saves souls." She stepped forward, her voice steady despite the storm around her. "This marriage may have begun as an arrangement," she said, "but what we have now is not something you can buy or fabricate. Look at this ranch. Look at the people who trust me. Does that look like pretense?" The crowd quieted. Daniel reached for her hand, and for the first time in public, his grip was not staged. It was real, fierce, unshakable. Later that night, alone with her by the fire, Daniel spoke in a voice roughened by emotion. "I told myself this could never happen, that love was too dangerous, too costly. But tonight, when you stood by me, I realized I was wrong. You are not just my wife by contract. You are my partner in everything." Emily's heart raced, caught between fear and joy. For a moment, the war with Vivian, the poisoned ranch, the rumors, none of it mattered. What mattered was the truth rising between them, a truth both powerful and terrifying. And yet, in the shadows outside the ranch house, unseen eyes watched. Someone was listening, waiting, ready to strike again. The storm that had been brewing in whispers finally broke into headlines. Emily saw it first on a newspaper left carelessly on the steps of the ranch. Bold black letters screamed across the page. "Scott Ayers' marriage, a contractual hoax." Beneath it was a photograph of her stepping out of the courthouse beside Daniel, her face pale and uncertain. Another shot showed them at the gala, Vivian's crimson figure in the background like a ghost haunting every frame. By midday, the story had spread beyond Texas. National outlets ran it on their front pages, talk shows dissected her every gesture, and strangers debated her worth across glowing screens. Words like gold digger and fraud clung to her name like stains she could not wash away. Inside the ranch, phones rang relentlessly. Board members demanded explanations, and staff whispered in corners. Daniel paced the study, his jaw locked, his golden eyes flashing with anger and frustration. "They want blood," he said at last, slamming a folder onto the desk. "Investors are threatening to pull out. The board is questioning my ability to lead. If this continues, everything my family has built could crumble." Emily stood by the window, staring out at the land that had begun to feel like her own. Her chest tightened. "And me?" she whispered. "What happens to me?" Daniel turned sharply, crossing the room in 2 strides. "You stand beside me. That is what happens." She shook her head, tears burning at the corners of her eyes. "The world already believes I am a liar, that I sold myself up, or money. How do I fight something that big?" His hand caught hers, strong and certain. "With truth. If we hide, they will destroy us. But if we stand together, if we show them what this truly is, then they cannot win." The decision was made within hours. Daniel called a press conference, and by the next morning the ranch gates were swarming with cameras. Reporters jostled, microphones pointed like weapons, voices overlapping in a frenzy. Emily's hands trembled as she stood beside Daniel on the steps, but his fingers laced tightly through hers, grounding her. When the shouting began, Daniel raised his hand. The crowd fell into a hush, hungry for spectacle. His voice rang out, calm and commanding. "Yes, it is true that this marriage began as an arrangement. I do not deny it. My grandfather's will left me little choice, and Emily agreed in order to save her family from ruin. But what began as necessity has become something else entirely, something neither of us expected." He turned then, looking at her, and the world seemed to vanish. "I love my wife. She is not a contract. She is not a fraud. She is the only woman who has ever stood with me when the ground crumbled beneath my feet." Emily felt her throat tighten, but she found her voice, steady and clear. "You call it scandal. You call it shame. But you have not seen what I have seen. You have not seen Daniel wake in the night from grief so deep it shatters him. You have not seen the way he fights to keep this land alive. And you have not seen the way he has given me back my strength. If this is a hoax, then let me live in it, because it is more real than anything I have ever known." For a long moment, silence hung over the crowd. Then the first clap came, hesitant but genuine. Another followed. Soon the applause rose above the shouts, drowning out the cameras, the accusations, the doubt. That night, the ranch was alive with preparation. Daniel had announced that he and Emily would renew their vows in front of family, friends, and the world. This time, there would be no contracts, no clauses, no pretenses, only truth. Emily stood before the mirror in her room, the reflection of the gold band on her finger gleaming back at her. She touched it lightly, remembering the coldness of their first vows. Soon she would stand before the world again, but this time the words would not be a mask. And yet, even as hope blossomed in her chest, she felt the weight of unseen danger pressing closer. For in the shadows of that triumph, someone else was waiting to strike, carrying a secret that could shatter everything they had just begun to rebuild. The morning of the vow renewal rose with a sky so clear it seemed heaven itself had chosen to bless them. Guests arrived in shimmering waves, luxury cars trailing down the ranch road, journalists jostling for the perfect shot, cameras clicking as if history was about to be written on Texas soil. Emily stood inside the guest house with her mother and sister, dressed in a silk gown that hugged her frame with quiet elegance. Unlike her first wedding, rushed and cold, this time her hands shook not from fear, but from the weight of love and the weight of what it meant to step forward in truth. When her father walked into the room, strong despite the toll of his illness, Emily's eyes filled with tears. He kissed her forehead and whispered, "This time, daughter, you walk toward a life of your choosing." Together they crossed the garden where white roses and blue hydrangeas arched above a wooden arbor. 200 guests rose to their feet, the music swelling as Emily's gaze found Daniel waiting. He stood tall in a black tuxedo, his golden eyes fixed on her as if no one else in the world existed. The priest spoke words about love, rising in unexpected places, but Emily barely heard them. What mattered was the warmth of Daniel's hand as he took hers, the tremor in his voice as he spoke his vows. Emily, months ago I asked you for a marriage of convenience. Today I promise you a life of love. You are my anchor, my partner, the reason I have learned to breathe again. Her voice trembled, but it was steady with conviction. Daniel, I once thought I was giving up my dreams to save my family. Instead, I found a dream greater than I ever imagined. I choose you now, tomorrow, and every day that comes after. When they kissed, the applause thundered, echoing across the ranch fields. Yet the loudest sound for Emily was the rush of her own heartbeat, because she knew this time was different. This time was real. As the reception began, Daniel raised a glass before the crowd. Friends, family, today we do not only celebrate vows, we celebrate new life. Emily and I are expecting a child. Gasps, cheers, and tears spread like wildfire among the guests. Emily felt joy burst inside her as she rested her hand over her stomach, already imagining the small life growing within. But before the applause could fade, another voice rose, sharp and cold. How touching, but what will everyone say when they discover you married your own sister? The crowd turned as a tall woman in a designer suit stepped forward. Emily froze. The woman's face was familiar, haunting. Patricia, her half-sister who had vanished years ago. She carried a folder of documents in her hand, her smile twisted with satisfaction. I've come to reveal the truth. Emily and Daniel share the same blood. Your perfect marriage is incest. Your vows, a lie. Gasps swept through the crowd. Daniel's face hardened, his jaw clenched as cameras swung toward them, hungry for scandal. Emily's knees buckled, her father caught her arm, and the ground beneath her seemed to vanish. Patricia opened the folder, flashing papers that gleamed under the sun. DNA, letters, evidence. Pay me what I demand, or the world will know every detail. Daniel stepped in front of Emily, his arm protective around her waist. His voice was low but carried across the stunned silence. Leave now, before you regret it. Patricia's smile widened. The truth has a way of finding light. You cannot bury it unless you pay me. The vow renewal, meant to be their triumph, had turned into a battlefield. Guests whispered, journalists shouted, cameras flashed, and the joy of moments earlier was drowned beneath suspicion and fear. Emily clutched Daniel's hand, her voice barely a whisper. What if it's true? What if she's right? Daniel looked into her eyes, his own burning with defiance. Then we will face it together. But I swear to you, Emily, I will uncover the truth before she destroys us. And as the crowd descended into chaos, Emily knew this was not the end of their story, but the beginning of the most dangerous fight of their lives. A fight not just for love, but for their very future, their child, and the legacy they were building together. The champagne flute in Sophia Reyes's hand trembled, though she forced her grip to stay steady. Tiny bubbles rose and burst against the crystal rim, their lightness mocking the heaviness pressing down on her chest. The text still glowed on her phone screen. Funding withdrawn. Sorry, kid. These things happen in business. 12 words had undone 3 years of sketches, sleepless nights, and sacrifices she hadn't thought twice about making. Her dream of launching a sustainable fashion line had been stolen with the swipe of her partner's thumb. She stood at the edge of the rooftop bar, 40 stories above Manhattan. The wind curled through her dark hair and carried the noise of the city below like a restless tide. Neon lights blurred into streaks against her tear-glossed vision, the skyline looking less like promise and more like punishment. She tipped back the last of the champagne, the taste bitter now, sharp with disappointment. A voice broke into her solitude, low and warm like aged bourbon. Either that's your first glass or your last. No one savors good champagne like it's medicine. Sophia stiffened. She turned, rehearsing a cutting remark in her mind, but the words caught before they left her tongue. The man before her was striking in a way that demanded attention. Tall, broad-shouldered, his tailored charcoal suit molded to him as though it had been stitched on his body. He radiated the kind of confidence reserved for men who had never once been told no. His eyes, piercing blue and assessing, rested on her with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. "I didn't realize my drinking technique was being evaluated," she replied, raising an eyebrow as she masked the ache inside with sarcasm. A spark of amusement flickered in his gaze. "I evaluate everything." He extended his hand. Julian Hartley. The name carried weight, and even in her current haze, it rang familiar. Hartley Enterprises, real estate mogul, ruthless negotiator, the kind of man the financial pages wrote about with equal parts awe and resentment. His palm was warm against hers, the brief contact sparking an unwelcome current up her arm. She withdrew too quickly, unsettled by her body's betrayal. "Sophia Reyes," she said, her voice cooler than she felt, "and I'm not looking for company." "Excellent," he answered smoothly, signaling the bartender. "Neither am I. I'm looking for distraction." He slid a fresh glass toward her, his fingers brushing hers with deliberate ease. Despite herself, Sophia let a smile tug at her lips. "That's remarkably honest." "I find honesty saves time." He studied her carefully, as though cataloging the details others missed. "Bad day or bad year?" She considered deflecting, but something in his tone, genuine curiosity rather than polite filler, made her answer. "Both. My investor just pulled out of my startup. 3 years of work, gone in a single message." "Fashion, yes?" His gaze swept her dress, lingering not with predatory intent, but with a craftsman's eye. "The asymmetrical collar, the architectural seamwork, that's your design." Sophia blinked, startled. Few men noticed such details. "Yes, how did you—" "My mother owned couture houses in Paris and Milan. I grew up with sketch pads and fabric swatches scattered across the floor." He leaned casually against the railing, their shoulders nearly touching now. "What's your brand vision?" And for the first time that night, she spoke without rehearsed defenses. She told him about sustainable fabrics, about designing for women who wanted strength and elegance rather than empty glamour. He listened, not with the vacant nods she was used to, but with pointed questions that challenged her assumptions, pushed her to articulate what no one else had bothered to ask. Time dissolved, an hour became 2, then 3. The rooftop emptied, the city breeze cooled her bare shoulders, and before she realized it, his jacket was draped around her frame, carrying his warmth and faint sandalwood scent. "I should go," she said softly, though every part of her resisted. "Or," he countered, voice dropping, eyes locked on hers, "we could continue this conversation somewhere more private." Her heart thundered. Business, she told herself, networking with a man who could change everything. But the lie cracked under the heat sparking between them. She met his gaze and surprised herself with the words that followed. "Your place or mine?" "Mine is closer." His smile was triumphant, yet touched with something almost grateful, as if he hadn't been sure she'd say yes. The elevator ride to his penthouse was silent, electric with anticipation. By the time the doors slid open to reveal a panorama of the glittering skyline, her pulse had already decided for her. Julian Hartley stood before her not as a name in the financial pages, but as a man whose kiss promised danger, escape, and the possibility of a night that would change everything. And when her hand pressed against his chest, feeling his heart race beneath his immaculate shirt, Sophia knew there was no turning back. Dawn slipped across the Manhattan skyline in pale strokes of pink and gold, seeping through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Julian Hartley's penthouse. The city below stirred with its usual rhythm, but inside the vast apartment the silence was heavy, broken only by the faint rustle of sheets. Julian reached for the warmth that had pressed against him through the night and felt only cool linen. His eyes opened to emptiness. The woman who had unsettled his careful control was gone without a trace. Sophia Reyes pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders as she hurried down the quiet street, heels clicking against the pavement. The air was crisp, her head still dizzy with the aftershocks of choices she could barely process. She told herself it had been necessary to leave before sunrise, to let it remain a fantasy sealed within one night. Anything else risked entanglement with a man whose world would consume hers. She repeated that thought like armor, though her heart beat with confusing defiance. Back in his penthouse, Julian sat on the edge of the bed, elbows resting on his knees, jaw tight. He was not a man accustomed to absence. People didn't leave him. He was the one who ended things, who dictated terms, who set the rhythm of every encounter. Yet Sophia had walked away without a word. Her scent lingered on the pillow, and instead of closure, it sparked questions. Who exactly was she? Why did he care? Sophia returned to her Brooklyn apartment, a space far removed from Julian's world of glass towers and endless resources. The walls of her studio were lined with sketches and fabric scraps, proof of years of relentless work, but today her designs looked like fragile dreams. Her phone buzzed with a reminder from her landlord about overdue rent. Reality hit with cruel clarity. One night of passion hadn't erased the fact that her business was unraveling. She threw herself into work, drowning doubt with the comfort of routine. Yet memory betrayed her. She felt his hands against her skin when she reached for scissors. She heard his laugh when she pinned fabric to her dress form. The man had imprinted himself on her senses in a way she hadn't anticipated. Julian, meanwhile, instructed his assistant to quietly track down information. Sophia Reyes was not on social media, not in society columns. All he uncovered was a modest boutique lease and a small loan connected to her name. That mystery only deepened his fascination. He told himself it was curiosity, an itch to be scratched, but beneath that calculation stirred something rarer, a pull that unsettled him more than any corporate battle. 2 weeks later, Sophia sat trembling on the edge of her bathtub, staring at the impossible. 3 pregnancy tests lay before her, each marked with undeniable double lines. She pressed her palm to her still flat stomach as disbelief fought with terror. A life was beginning inside her, not 1 life but 3, as she would later discover. Her vision blurred with tears. She whispered into the small bathroom, as though the tiles themselves could hear. Just you and me now, little one. We'll figure this out somehow. Across the city, Julian stared out from his office tower, empire stretching beneath him, yet distracted by the memory of a woman who had vanished before dawn. He didn't know that her absence was about to collide with his life in ways even he couldn't control. A storm of secrets and revelations gathered just beyond the horizon, promising that their night together was only the beginning. Autumn rain lashed against the narrow windows of Sophia's Brooklyn apartment as she sat hunched over her sewing machine, the low hum fighting to drown out the storm inside her mind. Weeks had passed since she had seen Julian Hartley. Weeks since the night that had changed everything. The truth she carried pressed heavier each day, though her body gave little sign beyond the fatigue in her bones. She had been cautious her entire life, disciplined in ways most people her age never were, but one night of reckless surrender had rewritten her future. The memory of Julian's touch was tangled now with the sound of 3 tiny heartbeats that had echoed through the ultrasound room and left her frozen in awe and terror. The doctor's voice still echoed in her head, explaining how rare it was for 3 separate embryos to take root at once. Triplets. The word had seemed too large, too heavy for the cramped room, and for her already fragile circumstances, while others might have called it a miracle. To Sophia, it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, wind rushing against her back, no ground in sight. Yet when she looked at the blurry black and white images in her hands, she felt an unfamiliar tenderness that startled her. She whispered their names before they were even born, words carried only by the sound of rain. Julian's world was moving with the same precision it always had, acquisitions stacking like polished stones, investors bowing to his calculated brilliance. Yet beneath the surface, cracks had begun to spread. He found himself staring too long at the empty side of his bed, remembering the woman who had walked away without hesitation. His assistant noticed his distraction when his answers came late in meetings, or his gaze drifted to the skyline as though searching for something lost. For a man who prided himself on control, the memory of Sophia had become an inconvenient weakness he could not shake. One evening, as Sophia closed the boutique she had fought to keep alive, a black town car slowed at the curb. Her heart hammered as she glimpsed the silhouette of the man she thought she had escaped. Julian stepped into the soft glow of the streetlight, rain clinging to his suit, his expression unreadable. He hadn't tracked her down for pleasure, not tonight. In his hand was a file from the Summit Holdings acquisition, her name stamped across a lease he now owned. Their worlds had collided again through brutal business rather than fate. Sophia froze in the doorway, one child asleep inside her and two more stirring faintly as though already sensing danger. Julian's piercing blue eyes swept over her face, and for the first time his armor cracked. He saw the truth written across her silence, the subtle changes in her body, the guarded way she shielded herself. He stepped closer, his voice lower than she had ever heard. "They are mine, aren't they?" The storm outside raged, thunder rolling through the streets, but nothing was louder than the silence that followed his question. Sophia clutched the doorframe, every instinct screaming to deny him, to protect the fragile world she had built. But the eyes that stared into hers were the same ones that had haunted her dreams, and now looked back at her in the ultrasound photographs. The truth could no longer remain hidden. Their night together had not been an ending. It was only the spark of a fire that threatened to consume everything she thought she could control. The boutique's air felt suddenly too small, the walls closing in around Sophia as Julian's question lingered between them. His presence filled the room like a storm about to break, every inch of his tall frame charged with tension. She tightened her grip on the counter, her pulse racing so fast she could barely hear the rain still battering against the street outside. The triplets shifted within her as if responding to the confrontation, a reminder that the truth could no longer remain buried. Julian stepped closer, the intensity in his eyes stripping away her defenses. He was no longer the charming stranger from the rooftop, no longer the ruthless mogul gracing magazine covers. He was a man staring at the possibility of something he had never expected, and the raw emotion on his face unsettled her more than his power ever could. His voice dropped, sharp and certain. "You disappeared without a word. You left me with nothing but questions. And now you stand here, carrying something that belongs to both of us." Sophia's breath caught at his words. "Belongs." The words sliced through her fear and pride, igniting a fire of defiance in her chest. "These children aren't property, Julian. They're not pawns in some corporate deal you can acquire. They're mine because I chose to keep them when it would have been easier to walk away. I've built this life brick by fragile brick, and you don't get to storm in and claim it." For a moment, silence reigned. Julian's jaw flexed as he struggled with emotions he wasn't accustomed to revealing. Anger, yes, but beneath it something deeper flickered, almost like hurt. He moved toward the display window, staring out at the wet streets, his reflection fractured by raindrops. "You think I wouldn't have wanted them," he said quietly, more to the glass than to her. "You think I'm incapable of being more than the man who makes deals and builds towers." Sophia's voice trembled but didn't break. "I think you're a man who thrives on control, and these children don't come with contracts or guarantees. They need more than your wealth or your name. They need patience, tenderness, consistency." She hesitated before adding the words that twisted like thorns inside her. "Things I'm not sure you can give." Julian turned back to her, eyes blazing. "You robbed me of the chance to try. Do you understand that I missed their first heartbeat, their first flutter of life, because you decided I wouldn't measure up?" His words struck her like blows, each one fueled by the ache of absence he had only just discovered. For a man who commanded empires, the knowledge that 3 small lives had existed without him left him unmoored. Before Sophia could respond, the sound of small feet echoed from the apartment above. Her Uncle Marcus's voice drifted down, warning but too late. The triplets tumbled halfway down the narrow staircase, curious eyes wide as they spotted the stranger below. Nathan clutched a toy car, Lucas held his sister's hand protectively, and Mia's gaze locked instantly on Julian. 3 pairs of cobalt blue eyes, identical to his own, froze him in place. Julian's breath faltered, his composure shattering. He sank to one knee instinctively, lowering himself to their level as though gravity itself demanded it. "Hello," he whispered, his voice breaking in a way Sophia had never heard. "My name is Julian." The children studied him with disarming innocence, and Lucas tilted his head with fearless curiosity. "Are you staying for dinner?" Sophia's heart thudded painfully as Julian looked up at her, his expression raw with something far more dangerous than anger. Recognition, longing, a desperate claim he couldn't yet put into words. In that charged moment she realized their fragile world had shifted forever. What had begun as one night on a rooftop was unraveling into a reckoning neither of them could escape. The line between protection and betrayal blurred, and the battle for their children's future had only just begun. The children's laughter lingered in the air long after Marcus guided them back upstairs, leaving Sophia and Julian facing one another in the cramped living space that suddenly felt like an arena. The fragile truce of dinner invitations and small smiles had been shattered by the raw truth of recognition. Julian's expression had hardened into something unreadable, but his eyes carried the storm. He had seen himself reflected in 3 pairs of innocent eyes, and there was no undoing that revelation. "We need to talk," he said finally, his voice low but unyielding. "Not as adversaries, not as strangers who shared one night, but as parents. You had no right to decide this for both of us." Sophia braced herself, every muscle tight. "I had every right. I was the one who faced the ultrasound alone. I was the one who lay awake at night wondering if I could survive carrying 3 children at once. You weren't there, Julian. You didn't even know I existed beyond a single night." His jaw clenched. "Because you never gave me the chance." Her hand trembled as she reached for the back of a chair, grounding herself. "What would you have done if I had come to you then? A billionaire engaged to someone else, a man I barely knew. Would you have believed me? Would you have welcomed them, or would you have accused me of trapping you?" Julian flinched at her words because they mirrored the suspicion he knew would have lived inside him. He had been raised in a world where every alliance carried a price, every connection a strategy. His silence was all the answer she needed. Sophia moved toward the window, rain streaking the glass in jagged lines. "I chose what was best for them. Stability. Love. A life free from being pawns in a man's empire." Julian followed her, his reflection looming beside hers. "You call it stability. I call it theft. I have missed 3 years of their lives. First words, first steps, birthdays. Do you understand what that feels like? To look into their eyes and realize everything has happened without you." The crack in his voice startled her more than his anger. For the first time, she saw not the impenetrable mogul, but a man grieving something he hadn't known was his to lose. The tension broke when Lucas's voice called faintly from upstairs. "Mommy, can he read us a story?" Julian froze, the words slicing through his fury. He looked at Sophia, searching for permission. Sophia hesitated. Every instinct told her to protect, to push him away, but the image of 3 little faces waiting expectantly tugged harder than her fear. She nodded once, curt and reluctant. Julian climbed the stairs with careful steps as though approaching sacred ground. Sophia followed silently, her heart pounding as she watched him settle awkwardly onto the small rug between the triplets' beds. Nathan pressed a book into his hands, Mia curled close to his side without hesitation, and Lucas studied him with wary excitement. Julian opened the book, his voice steady but softer than she had ever heard it, filling the room with words meant for children, but carrying a weight far greater. Sophia leaned against the doorway, arms crossed tightly, watching a man she barely trusted win the attention of the 3 people she loved most. The storm between them had only grown fiercer, but as she watched Julian's large hand steady the pages for small fingers to turn, she felt the first flicker of a dangerous thought. What if he truly wanted this? What if he wasn't the enemy, but the missing piece she had fought so hard to deny? That night, as the children drifted into sleep, Julian closed the book and looked up at Sophia across the dim glow of the room. His voice was quiet, almost reverent. "I'm not walking away again. Whether you fight me or not, I'm staying." Sophia's chest tightened. She didn't answer, but in the silence their battle lines blurred, replaced by something far more treacherous: hope. Julian's words echoed long after the children's soft breaths filled the room. "I'm not walking away again." Sophia stood frozen in the doorway, the weight of his vow pressing against every fragile wall she had built. She closed the door gently and led him back downstairs, the air between them sharp with unspoken tension. The boutique below felt different now, like the scene of a battle that had only just begun. He placed both hands on the counter, his posture that of a man who had negotiated billion-dollar deals but now stood on unsteady ground. "I've spoken with my attorneys," he said, voice low and deliberate. "Their advice is clear. I could pursue custody. I could challenge every choice you've made." His eyes found hers, piercing, relentless. "But I don't want a war. I want a family." Sophia's pulse stumbled. A family. The word carried both promise and threat. "And how exactly do you imagine that happening, marriage?" He didn't flinch. "Yes." The sound of it nearly knocked the breath from her lungs. Marriage. The word wasn't cloaked in romance or hope. It fell from his mouth lit. "Kiss strategy. You think you can erase 3 years of absence with a contract?" She stepped closer, fury trembling beneath her calm voice. "You think a ring and your last name make up for the nights I cried myself to sleep, wondering how I'd raise 3 children alone?" Julian's jaw tightened, but for the first time she saw more than steel behind his eyes. "I think a ring gives them legitimacy in a world that will judge them. I think my name shields them from whispers. And I think standing beside you, even if you hate me for it, is better than watching them grow up calling another man father." The rawness of his words caught her off guard, softening her anger just enough for fear to slip in. What if he was right? What if refusing him condemned her children to a lifetime of questions and shadows she couldn't shield them from? The storm outside intensified, wind rattling the boutique windows. Sophia turned away, pressing her palm against her flat belly as though she could still feel the echoes of those 3 small heartbeats. "I don't need your empire, Julian. I don't need your name. All I've ever needed is to know they are loved." He stepped closer, lowering his voice until it was almost a whisper. "And do you believe I'm incapable of love?" The question shattered her composure. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to hold on to the certainty that he was all power and control and nothing else. But the memory of him kneeling before their children, his voice soft as he read them stories, refused to leave her mind. Before she could answer, a sharp knock rattled the boutique's glass door. Both froze. It was far too late for customers. Sophia's stomach tightened with unease as a shadow shifted beyond the rain-streaked glass. Julian moved instinctively, placing himself between her and the door, his eyes narrowing. The knock came again, louder this time, more insistent. Sophia's breath caught as dread coiled in her chest. Whoever waited outside carried more than a casual visit. The past she thought she had buried was no longer content to stay hidden, and Julian's demand for a future had just collided with a threat neither of them could yet name. The pounding on the boutique door grew sharper, echoing through the narrow space until it felt like a drumbeat against Sophia's chest. Rain streaked the glass, blurring the figure outside into a shadow that seemed larger than life. Julian's posture shifted into something protective, shoulders squared, his body angled slightly in front of hers. For all his arrogance and power, in that moment he looked like a man ready to defend what he considered his. Sophia's voice came out barely above a whisper. "It's late. No one should be here." Julian motioned for her to stay back as he unlocked the door. The wind rushed in first, sharp and cold, before the figure stepped inside. A tall woman, drenched but unshaken, her blonde hair pulled back into a severe knot, her eyes glinting with familiarity and calculation. Cassandra Beaumont. Julian stiffened at once, his jaw tightening. "What are you doing here, Cassandra?" Her laugh was smooth, practiced, the sound of someone used to owning every room she entered. "I heard whispers, Julian. A hidden woman. Children." Imagine my surprise when I found out it was true. She turned her gaze on Sophia, sharp as a blade. "So you're the secret then, the one who trapped him?" Sophia's blood ran hot, but she held her ground. "I didn't trap anyone." Cassandra's smile curved, cruel and amused. "That's not how it looks to the world. A billionaire mogul, suddenly married off, or worse, manipulated into fatherhood. The headlines write themselves. Julian's voice cut through the tension, harder than steel. Enough. You have no right to be here and no right to speak about them. But Casa, Andra stepped closer, her heels clicking against the boutique floor. No right. She tilted her head, eyes burning into Sophia. You have no idea what kind of man you're building your life around. He doesn't love, he acquires, and when he tires of his acquisitions, he discards them. Sophia's breath caught, but she didn't look away. Every instinct screamed at her to believe, because wasn't that exactly what she had feared Julian would do? But before the doubt could root itself, Julian stepped forward, his voice raw. Leave her out of your games, Cassandra. You already took enough from me when you betrayed me. You won't touch my family. The word family hit Sophia with unexpected force. It wasn't just the children he claimed. He had said it as if she was included too, as if she belonged in that circle he would protect with his life. Cassandra studied him, realization flickering across her expression. So it's true. You actually care for her. That makes this all the more dangerous. Because the world I come from, Julian, doesn't forgive weakness. And love. That is the greatest weakness of all. She swept toward the door, leaving behind a chill colder than the storm outside. Sophia stood trembling, her mind torn between fury and fear. Julian closed the door firmly, locking it again before turning to face her. His eyes, still storm-dark, softened just enough to reveal the truth beneath them. She won't stop, he said quietly, and neither will I. Sophia's heart raced as thunder cracked across the sky. She realized their story had shifted again. The battle wasn't only between her and Julian anymore. It was between them and everything that threatened to tear their fragile, growing bond apart. The storm had passed, but its echoes lingered in the West Village brownstone. The triplets had filled the halls with their laughter, the walls now covered in finger paintings and the chaos of toys. But underneath the hum of family life lay tension that neither Sophia nor Julian dared to name. 6 months had passed since Cassandra's midnight intrusion at the boutique, and though she had not returned in person, her presence clung like perfume, lingering in the corners of their lives. Sophia had almost grown used to Julian arriving home early enough to tuck the children in, his voice reading bedtime stories as though he had been doing it all his life. She had grown used to his quiet gestures, a telescope for Nathan, a set of tools for Lucas, a violin small enough for Mia's curious hands. But what unsettled her most were the moments when his gaze lingered on her across the dinner table, his expression unreadable, as if he were cataloging her the way he once assessed skyscrapers and acquisitions. Their arrangement, neat and defined by contract, had begun to blur. Sophia still slept in her own room, her sketches spread across her desk late into the night. Julian's door remained closed, yet sometimes she caught the faint hum of his piano in the hours before dawn. Melodies filled with longing that contradicted his carefully measured words. The test came when the annual charity gala arrived, their first appearance as husband and wife before the unforgiving eyes of Manhattan's elite. Sophia had sewn her own gown, an emerald green piece that hugged her form and whispered power with every fold of fabric. She walked into the ballroom on Julian's arm, the chandeliers scattering light across polished marble, every camera flashing as though eager to capture proof of what many still doubted was real. It didn't take long before the predator emerged from the glittering crowd. Cassandra. Ra moved through the room with the grace of a queen reclaiming her throne, her diamonds catching the light like sharp blades. She leaned in with a smile that was all venom and velvet. So this is the woman who managed what no one else could. The mysterious Mrs. Hartley. Julian's jaw tightened, but Sophia's spine straightened with defiance. She extended her hand with poise. Sophia Reyes Hartley, and you must be Cassandra Beaumont. The name carried weight, slicing through the hum of surrounding conversations. Cassandra's smirk deepened, her voice sweet as poison. Once upon a time, Julian promised forever to me. But it seems forever has a shorter shelf life than expected. Sophia didn't flinch. From what I recall, forever ended the night you chose someone else's arms. The subtle gasp from nearby onlookers rippled like a wave, the blow landing sharper than Cassandra had expected. Julian intervened, his voice cold as steel. Enough. This event is for children's lives, not your ego. He guided Sophia away, but not before Cassandra's whisper cut into the space between them. He's mine, Sophia. You're just the intermission. Later that night, as they returned to the brownstone, the words replayed in Sophia's mind. Julian carried Mia upstairs, his movements gentle, his shirt sleeves rolled back. For a moment, Sophia watched him, the billionaire reduced to a father soothing his daughter's sleepy whimpers. Something in her chest shifted painfully. Cassandra's poison worked because it mirrored her secret fear that what she shared with Julian was temporary, an arrangement destined to collapse. But when Julian finally came to her studio door, his eyes weary but intent, his words were not the ones she expected. Whatever she says, whatever games she plays, she cannot undo what we've built here. His voice was quiet but steady. She is the past. You, Sophia. You are my present, Sophia's. Heart hammered, caught between disbelief and the dangerous bloom of hope. She had no chance to reply before Nathan's cry echoed from down the hall, but the words stayed with her long into the night. Cassandra had struck, but the war she promised was only beginning, and Sophia knew the next move would test not only her faith in Julian, but the very foundation of the fragile family they had created. The weeks after the gala twisted into something darker than Sophia had expected. Cassandra was no longer content to lurk at society events or poison conversations with innuendo. She began to move like a shadow around their lives, appearing at the preschool where the triplets were enrolled, arriving at gallery openings where Sophia's designs were being quietly celebrated, even lingering outside the brownstone, once under the pretense of delivering a gift for the children. Each encounter dripped with politeness, yet beneath it all was the hum of a calculated campaign. Sophia noticed the shift in Julian first. He stayed later at the office, his phone calls growing more clipped, his silences at dinner longer. The triplets didn't see it, they only saw the father who still read to them at night. But Sophia felt the distance creeping in like a slow leak. One evening she confronted him as he loosened his tie by the window, his reflection caught against the city lights. "You've been somewhere else lately. Is it her?" He turned, his eyes hard, but there was something beneath the steel. "Work," he said too quickly. Nothing more. But doubt had already taken root. Cassandra's voice echoed in her mind, whispering about patterns, about how Julian acquired and then discarded. Sophia tried to bury the thought, but it clawed back when an envelope arrived at her boutique. Inside were photographs. Julian entering a building with a brunette woman. Julian at dinner with her, leaning close. Julian leaving that same building in the morning hours, his hair disheveled, his face shadowed. Sophia's stomach twisted, but her hands were steady as she laid the photos on the kitchen table that night. When Julian came home, she slid them across the wood toward him. "Perhaps you'd like to explain these." His eyes flicked over them once, then again, but his face revealed nothing. "Where did these come from? Anonymous delivery," she answered, "which makes them all the more interesting." "They are not what they look like," he said firmly. "Then tell me what they are, because from where I stand they look like proof that Cassandra's prophecy is unfolding right on schedule." Julian's silence was heavier than any words. He set the photographs down, his jaw tight, his voice measured. "These meetings are business, sensitive negotiations I cannot yet disclose." Sophia's heart clenched. "Business that requires you to spend the night in another woman's apartment," she demanded, her voice sharper than she intended. He looked at her then, something raw breaking through his composure. "It is more complicated than you think. I have not betrayed you." But his hesitation, his refusal to offer the full truth, left a crack wide enough for Cassandra's poison to seep in. That night, Sophia packed a small bag. The triplets clung to her legs as she tried to explain they were visiting Uncle Marcus for a little while. Julian watched from the doorway, his face a mask that barely contained the storm inside him. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice hoarse. "And you're giving me no choice," she replied. The door shut between them, but Sophia knew this was not the end. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous. For the first time, it wasn't just their fragile marriage under threat. It was the trust that held their entire family together, and once broken, it would take more than vows or contracts to rebuild. Uncle Marcus's small apartment was never meant to hold the energy of 3 restless children and the weight of Sophia's unraveling world. Within days, the cramped rooms overflowed with toys, coloring books, and whispered questions that pierced her heart. "Mommy, when is Daddy coming back?" Mia asked one night, her blue eyes wide and uncertain. Sophia forced a smile, brushing a curl from her daughter's forehead. "Soon, sweetheart. He just needs time." But even as she spoke, doubt pressed against her chest like a stone. Julian had not stopped trying. Packages arrived daily: books for Nathan, a dinosaur set for Lucas, a dollhouse for Mia. Video calls lit up the evenings, his voice steady as he read bedtime stories from miles away. The children adored him, their giggles and cries of "Daddy, look at this" filling the small space. Sophia wanted to resist, to remind herself of the photographs lying heavy in her bag, but the sight of Julian's tenderness with their children shook her resolve. On the 4th day, the phone rang. Olivia's name flashed across the screen. Sophia hesitated before answering. "Before you hang up," Julian's sister said quickly, "I'm not here to take sides. I just need you to hear something." Sophia's voice was cool. "Then say it." "Cassandra engineered this," Olivia said bluntly. "The photographs, the whispers, all of it. The woman you saw Julian with isn't a mistress. She's Rebecca Sinclair, counsel for Horizon Medical. Julian's company has been negotiating an acquisition. Confidentiality was critical. Rebecca's husband represents a rival firm. The meetings had to be private." Sophia's breath caught. She wanted to believe, but the images of Julian at that building burned in her mind. "Then why not tell me?" Olivia's voice softened. "Because Julian is an idiot about personal matters. Contracts before confessions, that's his way. But make no mistake, Sophia, he has never cared for anyone the way he cares for you and those children." The words lodged in Sophia's chest, sharp with possibility. Before she could respond, a knock rattled Marcus's door. She opened it to find Julian himself, drenched from rain, his hair disheveled, his eyes bloodshot with exhaustion. The triplets squealed, racing to him, wrapping their small arms around his legs. His composure cracked as he knelt, pulling all 3 close. "I missed you," he whispered, his voice breaking. When Marcus gently ushered the children away, Julian rose to face Sophia. "The acquisition is finished. The secrecy is over. Cassandra set you up, and I let her. I failed to protect us." His voice faltered, stripped of arrogance. "But hear me now. I will not lose you. Not to lies, not to her, not even to my own mistakes." Sophia's defenses wavered. The storm that had carried her here felt different now. This was not the cold strategist speaking. This was a man laid bare. Yet before she could answer, Julian pulled a folded envelope from his coat. Cassandra's assistant confessed. "Written proof of her scheme. She tried to take you from me. She nearly succeeded." Sophia's hand trembled as she unfolded the letter, the words confirming every suspicion. Cassandra had orchestrated everything. The betrayal was larger than she had feared. She looked up, her heart pounding, her voice low. "What else is she planning?" Julian's eyes darkened. "That's what terrifies me, because Cassandra has already gone further than manipulation. She's watching us, and I don't know how far she's willing to go." The weight of his warning filled the small room, pressing down like a storm about to break. For the first time, Sophia realized their fight wasn't only about love or trust. It was about survival,